My name is Dr. Chris Jenkins, and I am the CEO of the Orianne Society and the host of the Snake Talk podcast, the podcast where you learn about nature's most feared, maligned, and persecuted animals. I invite you to listen to this conversation, and maybe you'll find that what you perceive as fear is actually rooted in a deep fascination. Welcome to the Snake Talk podcast. This is an episode that I've been wanting to do for a while, in that I've wanted to interview somebody early on in their career working with snakes, who spends a lot of time and just has a lot of interest in these animals, but is much earlier in their career than a lot of the people that we interview on the podcast. And luckily, I found the perfect person. We are going to talk to Peyton Niebanck today, and she is a wildlife biologist, a herpetologist, who is currently in the stage of her career where she recently finished her undergraduate and is working on a series of technician jobs. And so for those of you that don't know, if you want to be a snake biologist or really any kind of wildlife biologist, it's you don't just come out with your undergraduate degree and in most cases get a great job that you're going to be doing forever. You end up doing a lot of seasonal jobs, moving around quite a bit, and it's quite a process. And so Peyton's kind of in the middle of that now, so I thought it'd be an interesting perspective. And she also has been doing a lot of great things over the last handful of years, so a lot of things that I think you guys will be interested in. So welcome to the podcast, Peyton. How you doing today?
Great. Thank you, Chris, for having me on here.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I like to start with all the guests and figure out how they got into this crazy world of snakes. And so let's start from the very beginning. How is it that you found yourself getting into snakes? Is it something that's happened kind of recent in life, or something you've always had an interest in? How'd that come about?
I actually got into snakes from my mom, but it's funny because my mom is terrified of snakes. So she, didn't let her fear of snakes stop me from enjoying them and getting to know them better and studying them. So when I was about 3, 4 years old, my mom would bring me to the nature museum after school pretty much every day. And I would always go to the snakes because I was super fascinated by them. And we made friends with the curator at one of the nature museums, and he took me behind the scenes, and I got to hold my first snake ever, which was a corn snake, as one of their outreach animals. And I just remember having this glow on my face, like, this is so cool. And then would look at my mom, and my mom would stand like 5 feet away, and she's like, that's great, honey. And then ever since, I've always had a fascination. So I would research snakes. When I was 7, I was very curious and was like, what is a person who studies snakes? And at age 7, I already knew what herpetology or herpetologist was. And I was like, that's so cool. And then throughout middle school and high school, I mainly did sports and other extracurriculars. But it wasn't until senior year or junior year when your teachers start asking you, okay, it's time to apply for colleges. What do you want to major in? And for the longest time, I was like, what do I want to major in? I was like, I'm really good at sports, so I could do like exercise science. But at the same time, I was like, but I want to study something that isn't really studied that often. And I wanted to be well rounded and just have something new, like a clean slate that I don't know about as much. And so I, thought back to little 3-year-old Peyton of like, I love snakes and wildlife is, super cool. So when I was applying for schools, I tried to make sure those schools had some kind of animal sciences or fish and wildlife majors. So once I figured that out, I was like, okay, this will be great. I'm just going to go for it.
Good.
Eventually, I got accepted to the University of Georgia.
So all this was happening. So your mom was very supportive, well, even though she wasn't also participating with you. But it sounds like she probably had an interest in nature because she was taking you to nature centers. So is that kind of the case? Did she help kind of, even though your primary interest was snakes, did she help kind of foster a general interest in nature?
I would say so. Yeah, she really loved to garden. So, and she was also an interior designer at the time too. So she loved gardening and tending to her plants outside. And growing up, we used to have a really like big backyard and everything. So, and koi ponds. And so she would always find me out by the koi ponds, like messing with the fish.
So you have this childhood and you're growing up and interest in snakes and like a lot of us kind of end up doing sports for a while, and you end up deciding you're going to go for it as you go into college or to university. So first of all, kind of what part of the world did you grow up in, and then what were some of those schools that you started applying to that had that focus on, wildlife, animals, nature, those types of things?
So before I was living in Charlotte, North Carolina, in the suburbs, my first 8 years of life. And then when I was 8, just in the middle of second grade, my mom and I moved down to Alpharetta, Georgia, so the metro Atlanta area. Um, and then I had been in Alpharetta ever since. So the colleges that I applied for, I was the crazy person in my high school and applied to about 11 colleges because I wanted to have all the options.
Okay.
I applied for the University of Georgia, Georgia Tech, Clemson, Auburn, North Carolina State University, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, University of Tennessee, and the University of Florida.
Yeah, that's great. And I did the same kind of thing in that, uh, and it's a good piece of advice for anybody out there. But if you're trying to get into this field of, wildlife biology or ecology, snake focused work, there's a lot of different schools out there, and you can pretty quickly just on different universities' websites, figure out where some of those better places are for you. And it sounds like you kind of had a southeast focus and that you wanted to stay in the region that you grew up. And you grew up in Georgia and you ended up going to UGA. So was that, was that kind of your top choice, or, how did you end up making that decision basically?
Yeah, so UGA was definitely my top choice, especially for financial reasons. Have going to being in state was much cheaper than going out of state. But I did get an offer, a financial aid offer from the University of Florida, um, which I could have gone to, but UGA actually beat UF out. And I think either way, I loved being at a giant school just because I loved all the energy, all the outlets, extracurriculars, different majors, and just, the spirit of being in a giant college than being in a small one.
Yeah, and it's also worth mentioning to the audience, anybody who's looking at getting into fields like this, that in most states they have what's called a land grant college, and like in Georgia, for example, it would be University of Georgia, but most states have that, and it's typically those schools in each of those states that would have, kind of more of that, ecology related, programming, whether it be like wildlife biology or forestry or rangeland, whatever it might be. So that's an important thing for people to think about if they are kind of pursuing these. So then you end up going to UGA, and what does that look like for somebody who wants to be a herpetologist? You went in knowing that you wanted to be a herpetologist, and you're, kind of selecting your classes. I'm assuming you had kind of a whole series of classes you had to take that were, gen eds or just kind of general classes. But, were the bulk of your classes kind of focused in those areas that you were really interested in?
I would say half my time at UGA was more like specialized, focused. So specifically, I was in UGA's Warnell School of Forestry and Natural Resources, and UGA has, I don't know how many schools like within the whole university system, but Warnell was just one of them. And funny, I actually took a leadership, uh, like extracurricular in high school, and one of their activities was to shadow like someone in your designated career field that you want to know more about. And so I actually found my herpetology advisor at UGA because I was like, well, I want to be a herpetologist. And so I looked up herpetologist in Georgia. And then I found my advisor's lab page. And then I just contacted him from there. And that was when, again, I was a senior in high school. So once I got into UGA, I automatically went to the uh, right major within Warnell. And then my freshman and sophomore year, when I was there, we had to take those prerequisite classes or the weed out classes, where you have a giant hall of over like 500 students in like general bio and gen chem, which of course, you had to pass those in order to graduate, but also to get into your specific program. And the specific program I started was at Warnell, and it starts usually in your junior year. And so that's when you get more into the specialized courses of like field measurements, wildlife techniques, ornithology, herpetology, animal behavior. Um, and then from there on, it's just a matter of where do you want to go, what do you want to learn, and what can fit into your schedule.
So did you have a favorite class you took during your time at UGA?
Of course, my favorite was herpetology, but I also took advantage of the study abroad programs that the university offered. So I actually participated in 3 study abroad programs during my time at UGA. I studied abroad in China, then I did Australia and New Zealand, and then I did Costa Rica. in which I loved all of those classes when I was abroad because you're just in a different country and immersed in different cultures.
Yeah, that must have been great. Did you, when you went to Costa Rica, did you end up going to that, the UGA campus there up near Monteverde?
Yes, I did. We went to different parts of Costa Rica, and Monteverde was the last location that we went to. But yeah, it was awesome being in the middle of the rainforest.
Yeah, no, that it's a beautiful area. I've been there quite a bit. Spent a fair amount of time at the UGA station there as well. So, I think that's important for people to understand too, that there are these great opportunities while you're trained to be a snake ecologist, say, where you can go to all these different places in the world and experience different cultures and different just kind of ecosystems and even different communities of snakes. So that's great. While you're an undergrad, there's a lot of kind of extra things that you can do if you want to really push your career forward. You already mentioned the lab that your advisor ran, and I'm curious if you did anything kind of extra during your undergraduate time beyond just your coursework. Were you working somehow with the lab, helping out, doing research projects? Were you, I know there's different clubs that are related, like a herpetology club, or I can't remember exactly what it's called there, but, or, anything like that, seminars that were kind of extra, but that you might go to. How did you take advantage of your time at UGA and do some of those extra things that could help you, get ahead in your career?
I definitely will say the key component to be able to do all of those extracurriculars and being able to study and go to classes will be time management and prioritization. So I did take advantage of pretty much, for me at least, almost everything that UGA had to offer. Um, in Warnell, I was part of the Herpetological Society. They also had, their chapter of the Wildlife Society. I was also a Warnell ambassador, in which I did outreach programs to like middle school and high schoolers who came to visit the campus, specifically Warnell, and showed them some of our outreach animals that we had from the herpetology lab. And then aside from Warnell, I was involved. I also worked on campus too. So I brought in my sports component and I worked at the recreational facility as a martial arts instructor since that was my background. And I taught pretty much martial art classes whenever I wasn't studying, so I could also, make a living as well and have a break from studying too, and have like some kind of outlet where I could just clear my mind too.
Mhm. So did you end up working in the lab at all? As I was talking about, like, did they have kind of undergrads that helped with projects, or how did that go?
Yes, I did work in the herpetology lab. So I helped um, do like animal husbandry for all the critters that we had in the lab. So making sure that they were well fed and had water. And my advisor, who is a herpetology professor, Dr. John Mayers, he had a variety of graduate projects that undergrads could come and help out with. As well, during herpetology class, he required us to help with some of those uh, bigger lab projects because he wanted us to be more immersed in what research and fieldwork is actually like. And so we can get a better connection of like, this is the real world, like, this is what we do, and just to get um, experience, for us, like later on to help us apply for jobs, because then we would have that hands on experience and species experience. So we did like salamander diversity surveys up in the Appalachian. There was also seining for diamondback terrapins in Jekyll Island. And then there was like behind the scenes tours for Zoo Atlanta or the Jones Center.
Yeah, so I think probably the audience is probably getting the idea here, but and this is certainly how I came up, kind of just like you did. Like if you decide you want to be a snake person, whether it's a husbandry person or an ecologist, someone who works in the field, like you need to, as you go through your education, you really need to be taking advantage of every opportunity to immerse yourself. And it sounds like you took every advantage of that. How about like the summers? So, I know there was a point when I was doing my undergrad where, maybe the first couple summers I was kind of still working some of those jobs I had, from back in high school, because I went to school pretty close to where I grew up. But then, the last handful of years during my undergrad, I was always trying to get a summer position that was focused kind of around my research. So what were you doing, or not my research, but my interests in wildlife and snakes and salamanders and all those types of things. So what were you doing during your summers? Did you find ways to, again, to kind of further advance your career, help build your CV, gain experience?
Yeah, so my summers, I did spend, I would say, half the summer working at my martial arts studio. Um, but when I wasn't doing that, that's when I took advantage of the summer study abroad courses. So yeah, so in mm, I would say summer of 2019 is when I did the Australia and New Zealand study abroad for animal behavior and sustainability and natural resources. And then right after that, I did the UGA Costa Rica study abroad for conservation medicine and conservation biology. So basically, all of summer 2019, I spent overseas. And then during summer of 2018, that's when I did my China study abroad because I was minoring in Chinese language and literature. Um, well, I actually double minored because my other minor was ecology. So a lot of my major courses from being a wildlife sciences major satisfied a lot of my minor courses. So, which was a huge advantage as well.
Yeah. Snakes are one of the most persecuted groups of animals in the world, but we are dedicated to changing that. If you like what we've been discussing here on the Snake Talk podcast, here's an opportunity to turn that inspiration into action. Head over to www.orianne.org and explore how you can support the Orianne Society. Click on Take Action on our menu to make a difference. So you're doing all of these different things. You're taking all these courses and these advantage of these summer abroad programs and working in a lab and in parts of these, herpetology clubs. And you're kind of in this whole, the umbrella, if you will, of the university. And then you come up and you're heading towards graduation. Before we get to kind of graduation and then where you went from there, it sounds like you did quite a bit. Like you already talked about time management and those types of things, but was it hard? Was it doable? Obviously, it was doable. You did it, but just talk about that. How busy it was, and how you managed to get through it, doing all of these things. Are there maybe certain skills or approaches to it that you could kind of recommend to others?
Honestly, I'm very surprised looking back on it now on how I did it because I was one of those people that always had to have something to do, and I prioritized, everything. I had my academics, go first, and then work, and then after that it was like any extracurricular, like for meetings, and then after that would be to make sure to have enough time to like have a social life too, so I could take a break from doing everything pretty much almost all at once. But I basically my I would fill my calendar of everything that I had on it. So I whenever someone wanted to hang out, I would literally have to tell them like, okay, you have to give me a 2 weeks notice. And I mean, it was true because with with everything that I was involved in, and I was taking like 16 to 18 credit hours per semester, because I actually didn't start in when I was supposed to. I started a semester later, so I kind of had to play catch up, and it was very hard. Like, don't get me wrong, there was a time that I had that little, crisis that everyone kind of has of like second guessing their life and what they're doing. And I had that in sophomore year just before getting into my actual major classes because uh, even just the general like chemistry and general biology classes were hard because they were designed to weed out the people who are like serious about what they're going to do, where they're going to go versus who's just really taking it because you have to. Um, so I would have those meltdowns and second guesses sometimes and be like, why didn't I just like take the easier way out? But then again, like there really isn't an easier way out. It's just how you take advantage of everything that you have and the attitude towards it. Like I had a very positive attitude towards everything, even if it was hard. Just because I knew that like once I get to my major classes, everything will be like more interesting, like more involved and getting to know the subject or your major at hand better. And you kind of just have to go through the ringer in order to be able to, appreciate more of those classes or extracurriculars like after all of the just general hard things.
Yeah. So it sounds like one of the things that helped you through was that you were very organized in that, you talked about the calendar, so you kept an organized calendar and really managed your time well. And then, yeah, it sounds like the other real core kind of thing that helped you was just persistence and kind of a view towards the future, that your classes were going to be kind of more centered on your interests and, you're moving towards a goal and you've got to get through some of these stages to get there. So, well, then let's just say we're at that point where you get there and you're graduating from UGA. And I'll just tell the audience that, if you're going to go work with snakes, meaning, in, let's say, like a field ecology conservation setting, kind of like you're in, or even in like a zoo setting, there's kind of typically two routes people will go. They'll either go right into grad school, or they'll start getting jobs. And at that point, the main jobs you're going to be able to get are kind of seasonal. They're not permanent in nature. This isn't like some other majors in college where you just end up getting your degree and then getting out and getting a job. Like for many of the kind of more permanent jobs you would get in this field, most people are going on to graduate school. So, how did you make that decision, Peyton, about whether trying to go right to grad school or, starting to look for some of these more seasonal, temporary jobs and gaining experience?
I made that decision just based off of what opportunities were present to me. So during my senior year of college, you either take the route of a senior project or a senior thesis. So the project was group work versus individual, like this is your own research project. And there were, and I sat down with Dr. Mares and was like, I have no idea what I want to do after I graduate. Like, I don't know about grad school because I don't have a solidified idea or species of or subject of what I want to, um, further like know about. And I felt like I didn't have much knowledge too about how to go about and apply like to these grad schools. I'm sure if I took that route to go to grad school right away, like Dr. Mears and all my other advisors and teachers would definitely, help guide me. But I felt like for me, like, I've been taking like 16 to 18 credit hours like every semester thus far. So I was very burnt out and I wanted to actually use what I was taught in class, like out in the field, like firsthand. Um, and because again, like I was burnt out. And so I did the senior project in which I still feel like it was super beneficial, just because it already got, so I already had connections to like the Georgia Department of Natural Resources and helped out creating like a habitat management plan for a private landowner at the time for my senior project. So I learned a lot just by doing that, even if I did a senior thesis, just because I also had to do my part in researching what did that landowner need and want in order to best conserve for his land. Um, so and then I forgot how, but I think one of the advisors sent out a gopher tortoise technician application for the Georgia DNR, and I saw it and I was like, ooh, I want to apply for it, just to see. And it was an entry level position. And I interviewed for it. And then I ended up getting it. And I was like, oh, awesome. Um, and then by the time, graduation happened, that was COVID time. So I graduated in May of 2020. Uh, but thankfully, doing the Gopher Tortoise project, um, we were out in the field. So it's not like we were cooped up in indoors together. So I was at least able to start work. And ever since then, that's what I've been doing because I have loved actually applying what I've learned and seeing it, come to fruition and understanding it firsthand than just on the screen or in the textbooks.
So what were you doing in that gopher tortoise position? Like, what was the job? Were you doing like inventory or monitoring work, doing some type of research study?
I was just gathering, population, like demographic data for some of the wildlife management areas in South Georgia. So whatever was on the rotation, it was a crew lead, another technician, and myself. So it was just three of us. And whatever was on the list of what we needed to go survey, we would go down to that spot. And I learned how to survey for gopher tortoises and handle like a Trimble GPS system and know how to do line transect distance sampling. All the stuff that I didn't, I guess, know when I was in undergrad, just because it's like, oh, this is so cool. Like knowing all these survey methodologies and like instead of hearing about them, I'm actually doing them.
And so, you've done all this work leading up to it, but a lot of it's been kind of academic, and then you're thrown out into the field. How did that first experience working in the field, in this case with turtles, but how did that? Did you like that transition? Were you excited about kind of being in the field and actually working, or did it, did you kind of long to get back into more of like an academic, mode?
I loved being out in the field. I completely enjoyed it because I just fell in love with the work, and it's like the outside is my office. My office isn't a cubicle. So I and plus I loved like seeing all the wildlife too that I also like studied firsthand, because it's like, oh my gosh, like these gopher tortoises are so cool. And then I also encountered all the different snake species of Georgia, so like the eastern diamondback, and getting to see that in real life too, instead of in a jar of ethanol, on a lab table. Um, so I was just in awe of everything, because it's like, oh my gosh, like my career is starting and I'm doing it. So I was just full on happy and excited for pretty much everything.
Hmm. So you're soon doing this gopher tortoise job, and again, it's seasonal, and then that job begins to wind down. And how'd you find the next job? How did that come about?
So we use this wildlife job board called the Texas A&M Wildlife Job Board. And there's a lot of other wildlife job boards out there, but that is definitely one of the main ones, I would say, that every technician, grad student uses, because it's really up to date and has everything from full time jobs to graduate positions to seasonal work. Um, and so I found my next job, which was working with the invasive black and white Argentine tegus, which is a species of monitor lizard from South America. And it was in Everglades National Park. So I went on to that job, I would say, I think like 3 months after my gopher tortoise position ended. I actually had a little 2 to 3 month break trying to find my next position, because it was hard to find other positions that I guess that wanted me, or during the time, it was winter and I didn't have prescribed burn experience at the time, or other plant experience, which was, I would say, the one of the main jobs for winter, like that they were hiring during that time. So it took me a little bit until I finally found the Everglades job, and I moved down to South Florida in February of 2021.
Whether you're passionate about preserving biodiversity, ensuring the survival of threatened species, or simply want to contribute to a healthier planet, there's a role for you. Your support isn't just a contribution, it's an investment in a future where our ecosystems thrive. Go to www.orianne.org to donate or become a member today. Yeah, you said a couple things that were kind of interesting, and I think people need to keep in mind if they're going through this process. It's hard in that, first of all, I'll start off with on these technician positions, you typically don't make a lot of money. And then, but the timing of everything, because it can be wildly off, because, there's seasonal jobs and you're being hired oftentimes to work with a particular animal on a particular aspect of their biology, and there's kind of a timing to that. And then when that ends, it doesn't necessarily always kind of line up with other positions that are being hired. And so you always kind of have this this issue of, the timing and lining things up, and that can result in situations like you were talking about, where you might end up having kind of breaks between these. So, maybe you have some family support or something else helping you through that, but it can be a hard time because you're not making a lot of money, and the work, can be sporadic in a sense where you have some time off where you're not working in between gigs. The other thing that's kind of interesting, you've stayed in the southeast, but you've already mentioned you were in Athens area, and then you ended up moving down to South Georgia for work, and then you ended up moving down to South Florida for work. When you're doing these technician jobs, and you really have to be fairly opportunistic within bounds, and you can spend a good number of years kind of bouncing all over the country. So you need to be very flexible in terms of you're just your lifestyle. It's not a good time in your life to be acquiring a lot of furniture or whatever it might be. So, how do you work that, Peyton? Do you have like one central location? Maybe it's with your parents, or do you keep an apartment somewhere, or do you just kind of bounce around to these different positions and keep a relatively small amount of just kind of personal items, the stuff that you own?
Yeah, so I will say my home base definitely is my mom's place, back in Alpharetta. But what I really look for, as I guess a priority of mine for next jobs, is if they provide field housing, because like you said, um, technician jobs, even though they're super cool in what you do, unfortunately they don't provide, enough financial stability for yourself. And well, they do, but but not like a corporate job where you have a salary and all that. Like, technician jobs are always fluctuating, from job to job. Like, I don't have a steady income or a consistent one, but I do make sure that the jobs that I do apply to have field housing, which definitely helps, because then you can just bring down your whatever personal items, like necessities that you need from home that can fit in your car, and bring it with you to whatever field housing. And then field houses usually provide, the furniture, kitchen, bedroom thing. So normally all the field houses are furnished, which definitely helps as well, because then you're not getting extra miscellaneous things that you may use for that time. Like, it's already provided.
Hmm. Well, tell us about tegus. So you're studying this invasive tegu in South Florida. Tell us just a little bit maybe about kind of how it looks and what it's doing in this ecosystem that it's an invader in, and then kind of what was the project that you were working on with the tegu.
So, the black and white Argentine tegu is a species of giant monitor lizard. They can grow from like 4 to 5 feet long. They are generalists, uh, meaning that they'll eat anything from like plants and insect matter to eggs, ground nesting birds, other reptiles, small mammals. And they, like the pythons, have wreaked havoc in the Everglades ecosystem, which means that they have uh, overpopulated definitely the area, and they are they can be aggressive. I mean, when I was in the Everglades, we did a trap monitoring project. So we had these one door or double door have a heart metal traps of various sizes, so small, medium, and large. And we would place them. We had a giant trap array inside the park, so not all the way down to the marina, but by the entrance of the park, where the booth is, where you have to go to enter, and around the visitor center. And we also trapped outside of the park by the neighboring canals and levee systems. And we had over 300 traps out by the end of my season, and we caught over 840 tegus in and around the park.
Man, yeah, South Florida has some interesting things going on with invasive species. So, okay, so you're doing this tegu position, and then as that wraps up, where do you end up going next?
After my time with tegus, I went back up to Georgia actually, and worked with the Georgia Department of Natural Resources again, but this time as an eastern indigo snake technician.
So you're finally getting, you have this interest in snakes. I was going to ask you about it, but you've been working with turtles and lizards. So you finally get that job, where you're actually working with the snakes. So was that kind of a exciting moment for you, or kind of what were your thoughts around that? Finally getting towards, your goal.
Yeah, that definitely was an exciting moment for me because it was like, yeah, I love snakes and everything, but I haven't worked with them yet. And then finally, I get a chance to work with a snake species. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of jobs like specified for snake species. It's usually all the jobs that I see are generalized, or they'll have a category of various species and not just one thing in particular.
Yeah, you are right there. There are definitely not a lot of snake positions out there. We'll talk about indigo snakes more in a minute, but but let's speed up. So, correct me if I'm wrong, but we'll kind of jump over this next section for the sake of time. But did a stint with Georgia DNR working with indigos, and then you went back to Florida working on kind of a variety of species. Is that right?
Yeah, so after Indigos, I worked with another nonprofit called the Sanibel Captiva Conservation Foundation, which was on Sanibel Island and Captiva Island, and I did radio telemetry with 4 species of turtles down there, with freshwater turtles, not sea turtles. But I did get a chance to do some sea turtle work while I was there, since I was very close to the sea turtle department. And then after that, I worked for the University of Florida in their Rangeland and Wildlife Ecology Lab, and was a technician for them, doing a variety of projects for the grad students that were in the lab. So, one of the projects was bird biodiversity on rangeland ecosystems using acoustic recording units, or ARUs, and was also partnered with like Archbold Biological Station within the lab, doing the Florida Wildlife Corridor project. So we monitored both cameras and ARU units to find like the Florida panther and Florida black bear. And I also did get a chance to trap more tegus when I was with this lab as well. But instead of in the Everglades, I trapped them up in Charlotte County, so near like Punta Gorda, Fort Myers area. And then after Florida, I actually decided to take a break from the Southeast, and was like, let's go somewhere different. And I found another snake job with the U.S. Geological Survey, all the way in California. And I was in California recently, this past summer, for about 4 to 5 months and worked on the federally threatened giant garter snake with USGS. And after that, I did I did go back to Florida for a bit and worked with the UF lab. But then I saw, Orianne's posting about an Eastern indigo snake position, and I applied for that, and now here I am.
Yeah, you finally ended up getting the best technician job of them all, so that's great. But no, seriously, yeah, that's great. So you ended up out in California, so you got to see some of the West. You were working for a scientist who's been on the podcast here, talking about San Francisco garter snakes. But I hope really, we've just talked about all of these things that you've been doing, and now, as you mentioned, you're working with indigo snakes for Orianne, and we monitor most of the snake populations in Georgia, most of the indigo snake populations, and you're helping us do that. And so, spending a lot of time in the field, looking for indigo snakes, processing animals, pretty fun job, I would assume. And so. But the point I wanted to make to the audience is that you graduated in 2020. We're just at the beginning of 2024. So in like 3+ years, everything we just went through, gopher tortoises, tegus, garter snakes, indigo snakes again, sea turtles, all kinds of work, and bouncing around the southeast, back and forth between Florida and Georgia, going out west, and kind of that Spartan lifestyle, if you will, where your timing's off, and oftentimes you're looking for a place, as you mentioned, that has housing. It's quite a lifestyle. It's actually I think quite a fun time in a developing biologist's career. And so what so there are actually very few people, some do, but relatively few people will live that lifestyle much of their lives. Most people at some point end up deciding that, they want to get maybe a little bit more stability in their career and their finances and be able to own a couch and, those types of things. And so where are you at in this process? Are you getting close to the end of working these seasonal jobs? You're really starting to kind of yearn for that more permanent job, or maybe graduate school? Kind of where are you at relative to that?
I will say, yeah, now my priorities have changed. So I have loved working all of these different technician positions because um, as a 20 something year old, I feel like you should have all of these, adventures and like grabbing opportunities, when they come. But now, yeah, that my um, getting older and I say older, but anyway, um, but my priorities have changed because, yeah, like actually, jumping around and basically like having your whole life in your car doesn't sound as very luxurious anymore. I feel like it's become, a little bit of a hassle because it does get really tiring because then, the disadvantages are like, even though you do network with all these awesome scientists and have new coworkers and new friends, it is hard to, make roots somewhere and be a part of that like new community that you live in and getting a chance to get to know the area around you instead of like up and leaving. It's like, bye, see you whenever. um, but also, yeah, like the financial strains too. Um, being off my mom's insurance, I'd like to be able to take care of myself as an adult and um, be able, to have which I do pay for my own, health insurance, but also like having those benefits from like full time companies, knowing that you're stable and like in a good place, but also at the same time doing the work that you love. Um, it's very challenging for this career. So my next step I'm looking forward to doing is finding a full-time job, and yes, or grad school actually, because with all of the experience that I've accumulated and all the knowledge that I've gained too, just like firsthand doing it, I feel like grad school is definitely, the next step, and or the full-time job, whatever. I'm applying for both. So whatever, opportunity um, comes its way, like I'm going for it head on.
So, what is that job someday, maybe that would be kind of the core of your career, something you might work 15, 20 years? Like, what do you envision doing someday when you hit that kind of core peak of your career?
I could see myself being a state herpetologist, probably, full time, or being a full time, biological scientist for one of the federal wildlife agencies, and just having, yeah, and knowing that I've already made, some of those connections too, since I have been on the state, federal, and nonprofit level. Um, that's where I see myself, just because I really love the organization and like set in stone, I guess, like protocols of those organizations. Um, of course, being with with you, with Orianne and Sanibel, like I've definitely enjoyed my time with nonprofits as well. I just, personally for me, um, I like feeling, I make a greater impact, on a larger scale, whether that be the state or federal level.
Hmm. Well, I'm I'm glad we had this conversation. I mean, we really kind of did this like really whirlwind trip throughout your the work side of your life, but that's kind of what I wanted this episode to be, because I wanted people to see what it takes, and kind of the perspectives of somebody early on in their career, and all of the sacrifices that they make, but all of the adventure and connection, and just all the positives as well. So I really wanted them to hear your story, because I hoping it'll be inspiring to some others. I'll also say I think you're doing everything right, and I would just kind of keep doing it, and keep that persistence going, and I think you will likely end up right where you want to be. So I would like to, well, so let's imagine that we are out and where, let's just say we're down in South Georgia, and we're looking for indigo snakes, and we just had a great day, found a couple, and we're sitting around a campfire at night, and having a couple drinks, and I turn to you and ask you to tell me your best snake story.
Well, Chris, with all of my experiences, I of course have several best snake stories. But the one that really comes to mind, I guess, will be just recently. So I would say about 3 weeks ago, um, I was actually surveying by myself, and I was at one of the um, state sites that has indigos, and I was not expecting. Um, I wasn't expecting much. I was like, yes, I may get an indigo, may not, because the weather was very cloudy in the beginning, but like towards the end, it started to open up. So that day I found this giant, like 7 foot indigo, like first thing I would say maybe like 30, 40 minutes into the survey. And I was like, oh my gosh, I got one, like finally, like by myself. In which I would say this, I haven't done an indigo survey by myself really. And this was, a very proud moment of mine because I got that day I got 4 snakes instead of, just 1. So I got that 7 footer first, and I put in an action packer, took it back to the truck, because I wasn't done with the survey yet, and I figured, okay, I still have enough time, and I may get more snakes. So I go out, just parallel to the truck, and I am looking in these burrows to see for any snake signs. And then there's another one just basking out in a little bunch of grass. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, there's another one. And then so I get it, bag it, and then adrenaline keeps going, and I'm like, oh, this is awesome. And then I'm on my way back to the truck, and then I just look over to my left side, and I see one again, like coiled up, like on this little cliff, like sandy side. And I was like, oh my gosh, another one. And so I run over, I get it. And then I hear this like rustling in the palmettos behind me. And then there's another almost like 7 footer indigo just behind me. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's a mating pair, because the one I had in my hand was a female. And so I didn't have enough time to bag the female because I was like, oh my God, there's a male. And so this male is, going in between all these palmetto bushes, and I'm like on the side of this cliff, just like dancing around this palmetto bush with this male indigo and the female in my hands. And I'm like, no one's here to record this or share this moment with me. So I had this mating pair, and then I got like 2 others finally. And then I realized, like, oh, the male's probably going to go back to his burrow or hole or whatever, he came from. And so I was like, okay, I'm just going to go back to the hole. And then, yeah, like I was right. He was going towards it. And then that's when I finally grabbed him. And I was like, oh my gosh. And there was no one here to share this moment with me. And I have 4 snakes.
What a day. 4 snakes, two big males, and a male and female that were together. That's quite a day. Well, Peyton, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast and sharing your story. I think as I mentioned, I think it's pretty inspiring, and there's hopefully a number of things that people who are thinking about working with snakes or early on in their careers, I think there's some things in this episode that they'll definitely take away. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris, for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
And I'd just like to thank the audience and tell everybody to remember, snakes are animals too, and it's a privilege to see one in the wild.